Hello, this is John Courtney, and this is my video on the legalization of psilocybin. Right now, the mental health epidemic is currently going across the entire world, hurting a lot of people. Currently, there's 350 million people worldwide that suffer from depression. It is currently the world's leading disability, and by 2020, the World Health Organization has predicted that it will be the second leading cause of disease burden globally. It is predicted to outpace heart disease as the number one disease by 2030. It is estimated by the Center of Disease Control and Prevention that depression impacts an estimated 26% of the U.S. adult population. Now, legalizing psilocybin could possibly be one of the greatest efforts we could do to help combat this epidemic. Nearly 50% of all adults will develop at least one mental illness during their lifetime. Now, the reason I'm giving you this information is because psilocybin has been seen to help alleviate this mental crisis. I'll be talking about it later on this video, but this is currently a plague that's rampaging across the world, and we might have an alternative to help. The DARE program has covered up the reality behind drugs. Psychedelics have been shown to be less harmful than most other drugs. In 1974, 8 people were admitted to a hospital in an emergency. They'd consumed 1,000 times the maximum dose of LSD, believing that it was cocaine. They suffered from bleeding, coma, hypothermia, and anxiety. However, all of them recovered within 12 hours without blood transfusions being needed. And within 48 hours, all of them had left the hospital. A follow-up was done with most of the patients a year later, and there have been no residua seen from them.
The super safe drug Tylenol would kill you before the 20 times mark, unlike mushrooms, which wouldn't kill you not at all, because they haven't killed anyone.
Alright, so let's talk about the brief history behind mushrooms. Mushrooms were first used by tribal society thousands of years ago to incorporate into their beliefs. Ancient societies like the Egyptians, Romans, and Greek all showed fondness for it. In 1957, it was put in a newspaper entitled Seeking the Magic Mushroom, where journalists partook in indigenous ceremonies that changed their lives. They published this, and the news about it spread across the U.S. like wildfire. Eventually, the news about this drug came across Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. Richard Alpert would be later known as Ram Dass. They partook in a Harvard study where they gave prison inmates drugs to reduce the amount of chance they would come back to prison. They got in trouble for it because one of the kids had a panic attack, but they were eventually allowed to keep doing it. But then again, they were suspended for doing it, even though they hadn't done anything wrong. They were told they could practice it on the students there as long as it's controlled and they don't partake, but they got in trouble anyways. Now, eventually, the Vietnam War came, and the popularity of drugs skyrocketed, to say the least. Psychedelics are well known to tear down social structures like respecting authority, rules, and wanting to send your kid off to a war that they don't want to fight. Nixon had an idea that made it so we could help people stay for the war, and so we could hate hippies and black people. He connected drugs to black people, hippies, Mexicans, and started a war to disrupt these communities. Quoted by John Ehrlichman, who was the counsel and assistant for domestic affairs under Nixon, "We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and black with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their home, break up their meetings, vilify them night after night on the evening news." Did we know that we were lying about drugs? Of course we did. This whole drug war has really just been kind of a sham. We're focusing more on the drugs than the actual risks at stake, which I say is addiction. Only a tiny percent of people who have sampled these big four, heroin, crack, cocaine, methamphetamine, have been using that drug for the past month. For heroin, the number is 8%, for coke, it's 4%, crack, 3%, and meth is 4%. It is even clear that using a drug once a month amounts to having a drug problem. However, a portion of lifetime alcohol drinkers who became alcoholics is about 8%, which is the same as heroin. But we don't see those people who drink alcohol monthly as an alcoholic. Most of what we hate and fear about drugs, the violence, the overdoses, the criminality, derived from our prohibition. Addiction is a chronic illness during which relapses or flare-ups can return, with diabetes, gout, and high blood pressure. Dealing with addiction shouldn't require spending $40 billion a year on enforcement, incarcerating 500,000, and quashing the civil liberties of everyone, whether drug user or not. Treatment and prevention only get 45% of the federal drug budget, while enforcement and interdiction has 55%. Fortunately for us, psychedelics have been shown to be not addictive, even building a tolerance rapidly fast that prevents overuse. And of course, there is no certainty that decriminalizing drugs instead of just focusing on addiction would alleviate the issue. In fact, there is some data against it. Portugal in 2001 took a radical leap of decriminalizing weed, cocaine, heroin, and the whole drug spectrum. Teenage use went up rapidly. No expected tourists came with these drugs, and the overtime lifetime use of all these drugs went up. However, after the novelty wore off, teenage use went right back down to where it was before. The problem drug use declined by impressive amounts. It went from 4.6 people for every 1,000 drug users being addicts to 6.8. For comparison, Italy, who didn't decline, had an issue from 6.0 to 8.6 per 1,000 people. The spread of HIV from needles fell from 907 in 2000 and to 267 in 2008, which is a 340% decrease. AIDS also fell from 506 to 108 during the same period, which is a 469% decrease. The number of inmates serving for drug uses fell by more than half, making up only 21% of those incarcerated. If the US did the exact same thing, that would be 260,000 people saved. The reason all this worked is instead of putting money back in the drug war, they dumped it all in treatment. An increased amount of addicts served by 50%. A study done by Jeremy Daniel and Haberman shows that there are different types of mental disorders such as depression, anxiety, alcohol addiction, and tobacco addiction, which all can be treated by psilocybin. There have been background checks to make sure that all these studies have unaltered results as possible. It's shown with alcohol addiction, it went down by 27.2%, with heavy drinking going down by 26% after doses. With tobacco, patients that smoke at least half a pack a day were given doses 3 times over 13 weeks. It shows that 80% of the participants remained abstinent after 6 months. The next one was done with cancer patients and anxiety, with some of them being given placebo just to make sure that it's done correctly. Anxiety reduced significantly in the past 1 to 3 months after post-treatment with the psilocybin. The next study was done with almost 200,000 people, which researches suicidality and depression after usage. Those with an extreme disorder in thought showed a great decrease in negative thoughts, plus an increase in mood. And those who suffer from mild depression also showed improvement, just less than the extreme people. There's more research to be done, but so far, psilocybin shows great results.